Hello and welcome to the Delusional Boyfriend Book Club. My name is Courtney and I'll be your host. And today I want to talk about the subverse. I read my first ever BL manga subverse and I had to talk about it. So if you guys are familiar with the boys love genre, you might be familiar with some of the different alternative universes that exist therein. One of which is the Omegaverse, which started with fanfic way before, it was popularized in Japanese manga. It was being used in fanfic in the West, and I think that it's been done the best by Japanese manga. In the Omegaverse, there's secondary genders. You can be an Omega, a Beta, or an Alpha. And these secondary genders determine not only how you fit into society, but what role you play sexually. So it's a way to get gender roles a whole new meaning and a breath of fresh air. So for a lot of people, the Omegaverse is very off-putting because they're constantly reading BL in order to escape gender norms and gender roles. And for other people, it's a really interesting way to explore their sexuality and their personality and put themselves in gender roles that they normally wouldn't be assigned. So if you're a female reader and you have an alpha in a story who is the penetrative, active partner, the partner who is the top, who is aggressive, who is the impregnator. If you are a female reading BL and you don't usually get to act out that type of personality or that kind of gender norm, you can put yourself in the alpha's shoes just as easily as you could put yourself in the omega's shoes. So it's a really fun dynamic to explore. Now, the Omegaverse led way to a lot of different alternate universes, one of which is called the Subverse. I'm going to get into that today, but you should know that there are many different multiverses like this, including a cake verse where people can either be a fork or a cake, be somebody who tastes flavors or somebody who is tasted. So there's a lot of creativity in these alternate universes, but one of my favorite kink positive areas of creativity is BDSM, and that is what Subverse is all about. So the Subverse is a way of exploring secondary genders and dynamics in BDSM roleplay through a fantasy world in which you can't control which type of characteristics you display. So in real life, if you are a dom or a sub or a switch, you can choose to go back and forth or in or out of those communities and change up the roles in which you're assigning yourself. But in the subverse, that's not exactly true. You're born either being a sub or a dom or a switch or neither. People who are born being a dom want to dominate others. And if they're not allowed to enact this dominance, especially in a sexual way to a partner, they kind of go crazy. They get aggressive. You can liken it to an animal who isn't allowed to breed. It is very animalistic. It is not very civilized. And for a lot of people in these made up worlds, it's looked down upon to act upon those urges. In the subverse, if you are not a dom, a sub, or a switch, if you're a normal person who doesn't experience these urges, you might look at somebody who is enforcing their dominance over other people in the world around you as unable to control their urges and aggressive, mean, bad, whatever. Meanwhile, if you see somebody who is subservient and who cannot help but obey the orders of dominant people around them, you might think they're weak or incapable of having their own agenda or mission or holding their own insistence. So those are the prejudices and the stereotypes that we're working with within the subverse. And it is very topical and relevant to issues in our real world because, of course, being born a woman, there are certain things that people in society will stereotype me and use against me kind of against my will. So they might look at me as a female and say, yes, that person's going to be submissive or subservient. And if I try to overcorrect in the other way and be extremely dominant, they might say that's just a domineering woman. That's just a different kind of stereotype you can fall into. So it is fun to read these kinds of fictional universes where they explore those gender norms and stereotypes that are enforced on us in the real world, but we get to exacerbate them and emphasize them and dive deeper into them in this kind of caricature-y way that makes it even more obvious why these things are harmful, and also why it's empowering to take them back and indulge in the things that we like for our own sake, regardless of the way that the rest of the world wants to interpret that. So in the subverse, the dominant characters are able to look at a submissive character and make them heed their commands. So if a dominant person says kneel or strip, sit, beg, come, if they say any of these things to a sub, then the sub will have to obey them. They have almost no willpower to say no. This is where the question and the issue of consent comes into these universes. And oftentimes the whole purpose of these stories is to allow question of consent to be the overriding plot line. So I want to talk about a story today called Hands Off My Sub. It's by the author Same. You can read it on Manga Plaza, and this is my first introductory into the subverse. In this story, we have a character named Haruki who is working at a male escort host club, and he is a sub, but he mostly entertains women. In this story, we have a character named Haruki, and he works at a host club where he mostly entertains women, and nobody knows he's a sub. So he has been bottling up and repressing his urges and his needs to obey and to be subservient to another. And this is culminating in him needing to reach out to somebody who's a dominant so that the dom can come and practice with him the certain things that he might need to feel at ease again. So he goes on a dating website and he reaches out to a experienced dom and asks him to come over. He comes over and he says, I don't want anything penetrative. I just want to fool around a little bit. I need to be in my element. I need to be a sub for a moment so that when I go back to work, I have it out of my system and nobody can use that against me or won't smell my weak spots. Now, when the dominant gets there, his name is Suguri, and he has such a powerful stare that most subs aren't able to resist him. So he doesn't really engage in those types of relationships super often because he doesn't want to seem manipulative or overpowering or hurt anybody, and it's hard for him to tell when people are consenting and when they're just falling into his dominant spell. So he gets to the apartment, they start hooking up, and he is very clear about what he will and won't do and how powerful his dom influence will be on this sub. The sub lays down the law. He says exactly what he's looking for, what he's not looking for, and this leads to a pretty powerful night for him. So the next day when he goes back to work, Suguri, the guy who had met him through the app, shows up there as well. And they become coworkers. And this is when Suguri starts to find out that there's another person at the host club who has been manipulating Haruki and making him feel uncomfortable, as well as manipulating other customers who are coming to their place of work, and basically using his dom powers to make subs who are clients or coworkers feel weak and embarrassed and unable to resist him so that he becomes the top host at this club. When Suguri finds this out, it starts to get under his skin, and as he is trying to gain the trust of Haruki and get closer to him and have more experiences with him, he asks him to be his partner, and Haruki at first rejects him. And when he sees another dom trying to hurt the man that he loves, he steps in and he protects him, and he says, I am kind of unable to help myself from being protective of you, but I want this to be your choice. And that's where we see in this universe, there's going to be a lot of Dom characters who are forceful and not extremely concerned about consent. And then there's going to be people who fight against that stereotype and who want a relationship that's all the more powerful and beautiful and special because their partner chose and didn't just give in to this animalistic need, but chose them with their full mental capacity as their partner. So he steps in, he protects him, he reiterates this offer to be partners so that all of these other Doms will leave him alone and so that they can also practice certain things on each other in this BDSM setting that they haven't been able to practice in full with others because it requires such a deep intimacy and knowledge of each other. So the story, of course, has a happily ever after. It is extremely spicy. If you guys like a lot of heat in your stories, you're going to like this. And I just wanted to get on here today and talk about how much I appreciate this universe. I appreciate the explanation to people who aren't in these kind of safe kink spaces about how safe it can be to interact in these dynamics. When you have really explicit, clear consent and boundaries, and you're able to practice this art with somebody who wants to explore your boundaries and your edge and make you more comfortable and more aware of your own pleasure, your own pain, the places you want to go, the places you don't want to explore. When you find somebody like that, it can be really magical. And I think there's a misconception that anytime there is a power dynamic at play, or anytime there is rough or unusual or kinky sex at play, that it's dark or dark romance. And that's just simply not true. I think that these can be some of the most green flag healthy relationships. So I personally, as I'm going to turn 30 this year. So as I've gone through my 20s and I've learned a lot about myself, I have had a hard time explaining to others just how enlightening these kinds of like exploratory play can be. And I think when we are able to find that in fiction and spread that fiction, especially to our girlfriends or like to your sister who might also be getting married, who you might also want to share some of this knowledge with, sometimes it's easier to just offer them a story or recommend them a romance than it is to fully get into your own experiences. So I think this is really fun. I love this subgenre of BL. I think that it is going to absolutely blow up and we're going to see a lot more stories like this. So I just needed to get on here and talk about it. I want to know if you guys have read any stories in this subgenre. If you have read any Subverse, please let me know. Drop the name below in the comments. If you've read Hands Off My Sub, also let me know what you thought about it. Is Suguri your delusional boyfriend? Is Haruki, the sub, your delusional boyfriend? And are you going to read more of this subgenre? I definitely am going to. I'm going to seek this out all over the place. I'm a huge fan of the Omegaverse, so these alternate universes and realities are a type of fantasy. They're a subgenre of fantasy that I really vibe with. It's like a modern day fantasy with sci-fi elements, and they're always very spicy. So I really enjoy them. I'm excited to find more, and I hope you guys are too. I am going to Ireland tomorrow, so I just wanted to make sure that I had this little bonus episode all ready to go since there's an extra Thursday in the month in March. And if you aren't already subscribed to the podcast, if you're listening to this on a podcast app, make sure that you turn on automatic downloads. That way, when I do bonus episodes, they are delivered directly to your library. And every Tuesday, I'm also doing an episode with my husband. We're calling it Shonen Simp Club, and we're going through One Piece, one volume at a time, and breaking down who we ship in that volume, who our delusional boyfriend is from that volume, and who is starting to spark chemistry, who we think might be endgame and might end up together. So if that sounds interesting to you, tune in on Tuesdays. If you like BL and romance and you're a Fujoshi, if you like BL live actions, manhwa, romance novels of all capacities, straight, gay, asexual, aromantic, otherwise, please check out the podcast that I drop on Thursdays. Thank you so much for being here and tuning in and listening along. And until next time, remember, sometimes the delusion is the solution. Bye.